Hi and welcome, I'm Mish Bondizio, and this is Creating Cadence, a podcast about what it really takes to work well and live well in this fast-paced world we live in. I'm the author of The Cadence Effect, and aside from this podcast, I also write over on Substack. The focus of my work is on reimagining work and business as part of building more regenerative, sustainable systems. It's for high-performing founders and teams, creatively minded entrepreneurs, and purpose-driven business owners who want to make a meaningful impact without sacrificing themselves or their people to burnout, hustle, and overwork. This is episode 97, the 7th of season 15. This season follows a monologue format where I'm sharing some of the ideas I'm exploring around burnout, poorly designed systems that are no longer fit for purpose, and what it really means to build sustainable performance in the modern world of work. Whether you're listening on your commute, on a walk, or in between tasks, thanks for tuning in. Let's begin. I want to start with a moment that might feel familiar. It's Friday afternoon. Your week has been full. On paper, it looks productive. You've got meetings ticked off, emails answered, decisions have been made, fires have been handled. And yet, there's this quiet, persistent feeling sitting underneath it all. You think to yourself, it was another busy week, but did I actually move anything forward? Not just forward in the short term, but forward in a way that matters. Forward in a way that feels aligned. If you've had that feeling of doubt or discomfort, you're not alone. And more importantly, it's not a failure of discipline. It's not that you need a better to-do list or a more sophisticated calendar system. It's something deeper than that. Because what most people are experiencing right now isn't poor time management. What they're experiencing is time poverty. The link between time poverty and fragmentation. Time poverty doesn't mean you don't have enough hours. You can have flexibility, you can have autonomy, you can even have a relatively light schedule and still feel like you don't have time. Because the real issue isn't quantity, it's fragmentation. Our attention is split across too many things, so our thinking is constantly interrupted, and we find ourselves mid-thought, never quite landing anywhere most of the time. And when that becomes our default rhythm, important things start to disappear. Things like clarity, depth, and perspective. We start losing our ability to think properly, and without that, everything else starts to degrade. Our decisions become more reactive, our work becomes more surface level, and our sense of progress starts to feel strangely hollow. The default week and why it fails. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Our default weeks are reactive by design, and most people don't design their week, they inherit the design of their week. That means that meetings land wherever there's space, messages demand immediate replies, requests arrive without filters, and before long our calendars become a reflection of everyone else's priorities more than our own. Even if you've done the inner work, even if you've built capacity, like we've talked about in the last episode, without structure, your week will drift towards urgency every single time. So the question isn't, how do I fit everything in? The better question is, what kind of thinking does this week require? And that's where everything starts to shift. If our weeks are a design problem, that means that we can design a solution. And the solution is a week that works. What you're actually designing isn't a revised schedule. Instead of time, you're designing with rhythm in mind. And that means that your days play out quite differently, because they're not rigid. It's not about perfectly optimized days. It's about matching your energy, your cognitive load, and your work to the right moments in your week. So instead of treating every day the same, you start to give them different roles. Here's one example of a week that works. Maybe Monday becomes your thinking day. That means less meetings, more strategic work, a focus on the vision. Let's say Tuesday and Wednesday become your collaborative days. This is where conversations, delivery, and meetings happen. These are opportunities for alignment. Perhaps Thursday becomes your creative day. This is about protected space, deep work, problem solving, innovation and blue sky thinking. And say Friday becomes your clearing day. Maybe that's about review, reducing, resetting, and planning. Now, this isn't about creating the perfect week. Life doesn't work like that. Things are obviously going to shift, and sometimes things will break, and little crises will crop up. So your week has to be elastic enough to stretch or shrink to your needs. But having a default rhythm means that you're making conscious exceptions that occasionally shift your design week instead of living in constant chaos, fighting fires, being pulled left, right, and center. And here's what's really exhausting you. The real drain is the context switching. It's not just how much you're doing, it's how often you're switching in a day. Say, for example, you have a strategy call, then there's Slack messages to deal with. There's a hiring decision to be made. You need space for creative thinking. Someone needs a quick approval. There's another meeting that gets slotted in quickly. And there's a budget review. And in between all of this, you have to find time to book a dentist appointment and speak to the school principal because your daughter's had a problem at school. Each one of these things requires a different version of your brain, a different cognitive mode. And every time you switch, there's a cost. It's not just a cost to your time, it's a cost in terms of energy, attention, and clarity, because part of your mind stays behind, stuck on the previous task. This is what researchers call attention residue, and when that builds up over a day or a week, you never quite get to drop into depth, because you're always slightly distracted, always slightly scattered, always slightly behind, and always slightly exhausted. The shift is to treat thinking as infrastructure. So here's a simple but often resisted idea. What if at least 20% of your week could be reserved for thinking? Not responding, not preparing, not reacting, just thinking. That could be strategic thinking, creative thinking, reflective thinking, or long view thinking. And I know what you might be thinking right now. I don't have time for that. But here's the reality. If you don't have time to think, you're operating reactively by default. You're navigating complexity without perspective, and that's when things start to feel harder than they should and heavier than they should. Here's a story about fixing the strategy. Let me tell you about someone I'll call Dylan. Dylan runs a tech company. After a couple of intense burnout cycles, he and his team made a big shift. They simplified everything. They cut projects, streamlined the roadmap, focused on one core direction. On paper, it looked great because it was cleaner, sharper, and more strategic. But a month later, nothing had really changed. Dylan was still waking up at 3 a.m., he was still anxious and still exhausted, and so was his team. And he said something that stuck with me. He said, "We fixed the strategy, so why do I still feel like this?" The answer was uncomfortable for him to take, because he hadn't fixed the strategy at all. They as a team had just cleared one layer of a deeper problem. That's because designing your week is just one part of the solution. The missing piece for them was regenerative working practices. Because you can optimize your business, refine your roadmap, and design the perfect plan, and still run yourself into the ground. Avoiding burnout isn't about better tools, or working less, or stepping away. It's about building a system where output and recovery can coexist. And that's where regenerative work comes in. Not as a philosophy, but as a practical framework, one that supports thinking, clarity, and sustainable execution. I'm going to share a framework that I use. It's simply called the 4 R's, which stands for rest, regulate, reduce, and refocus. Think of these not as a checklist, but as a system. Rest comes first because it's our foundation. You cannot outwork a depleted brain, and yet so many of us try. Sleep gets pushed out, evenings blur over multiple screens, we sleep with our phones beside our beds, so mornings start with notifications and social media rabbit holes. Over time, something subtle happens. Our thinking gets degraded, our emotional range narrows, and our creativity drops. Not dramatically, just enough to make everything feel a little bit harder. Now, rest comes in many forms. It's not just about good sleep architecture, although that's the most important kind. What's important for you is to remember that rest isn't a reward, it's infrastructure. How can you build it into your schedule? How can you make it foundational to how you work? The second piece of the 4R framework is regulation. This is about our nervous system. Because for many high performers, the issue isn't time, it's being in a constant state of low-level urgency. That means that we're always slightly on, always slightly activated, even when nothing is technically wrong. And if you're in that state, it drains you. Regulation isn't about long, involved, or complicated routines. It's about small resets. A few slow breaths before switching tasks, a short walk between work blocks, maybe a 5-minute meditation before lunch or a meeting. This is about creating moments where your system can settle, because a regulated system thinks better, decides better, and leads better. The third R is about reduction. This is all about removing the friction. And this is where things start to get lighter. Most people try to improve performance by adding more tools, more systems, more structure. But often the real shift comes from removing what's unnecessary. We have too many notifications, too many channels. All of this forces too many decisions. When you reduce the friction, work becomes easier to enter and to complete. It makes us work more effectively, and it becomes easier to sustain over the long haul. And the final R is refocus. This is about managing our attention, because attention isn't something you either have or don't. It's something that you train and protect. Even one focused hour a day can change everything, but only if it's truly protected. That means no switching, no interruptions, just depth. So create the guardrails and set the expectations to protect your focus. The 4 R's don't work in isolation. They are interconnected and designed as a system. Rest improves your thinking, regulation stabilizes your energy, reduction removes unnecessary strain, and refocus directs your attention to where it actually matters. This is what regenerative working looks like in practice. Not stepping away from ambition, but building a system where ambition, delivery, and recovery can coexist. You don't need to overhaul everything at once. Maybe start with 1 R and see where you go from there. Fix your sleep window, or add 1 regulation habit, or remove 1 source of friction, or try 1 focus sprint. Remember, the goal isn't optimization, it's sustainability, so keep it manageable. So here's how this all connects. In the last episode, we talked about building inner capacity. Here, we've expanded that into a sustainable framework. It's a structure that complements capacity. Because capacity without structure gets scattered, and structure without capacity creates chaos and collapse. What you're building here is a system based on a rhythm. It has structure, but it's flexible. A system where your week supports your energy, and your energy supports your work. So as we close, I want to leave you with a few questions to consider, not to overwhelm you, but to gently help you to think about how you can recalibrate. Where in your week are you fragmented? Where are you switching too often? And where could you create just a little more rhythm? Don't try to change everything at once. Just think about how you can start with 1 day, or 1 block, or 1 shift. Because sustainable performance doesn't come from doing more. It comes from working in a way that actually supports you to do your work better. In the next episode, we're going to build on this further, because once you've created rhythm and reduced friction and started to protect your time and energy, something interesting happens. Constraints start to appear. And most people see constraints as limitations, but in reality, they're often the very thing that helps to unlock our creativity and innovation. So that's what we'll explore next. So thanks for listening. I'll be back soon with the next episode in the series, but a few quick notes before you go. If you found this episode helpful, please like or rate the podcast wherever you listen to it. It helps others to find us. You'll find out more about my work at creatingcadence.co, and you can grab a copy of my book via thecadenceeffect.com. You can also read more of my articles at creatingcadence.substack.com. The Creating Cadence podcast is produced by Bondizio Media and is available on Apple, Amazon, Spotify, and YouTube. It's edited on Descript, and this season's music is from Changing Their Minds on Premium Beat. So until next time, keep moving forwards with courage, curiosity, and cadence. Bye for now.